It's fascinating when the weight of our attention goes into a sensory experience, that the volume or the intensity in how we experience that can change so that it really is louder. If it's seeing, we see things with more acuity or color or vividness. If it's hearing, our hearing range is further than what we could imagine, or even closer. Sometimes we can hear what's the internal process of the body, the blood rushing behind the ears, the thumping of the heart, even the breath coming in and out. The hearing can be general and expansive, like an ocean of sounds, especially listening to crowds, where even when the mind is not engaging in the words, but just the sounds, we no longer even recognize English. It's just the sounds. Or it can become very narrow and precise and can hear one particular sound out of that ocean and that dominates. With smells. Smells is incredible to think that the thing that is being taken in are molecules released by the actual object. This can develop also our ability to really become sensitive to smells as they change in the air currents, as they come to us. And the sensations that arise, I've noticed even when I hear sounds, I hear it on my entire body as it makes the impacts. The sound waves makes the impact on certain parts of my body. And depending on what the frequency of that sound is, different parts of my body can resonate. Like listening to bass in music will be in the chest. We open up an entire universe of possibility for experiencing. When we are inhabited in our body, open and receptive, the world becomes something novel. And our level of connection to what's happening and interest, engagement goes up. And we become curious. And the moment we are interested and curious, we are present. We are fully present, receptive, without judgment about the incoming information. Without needing that incoming information to be in any particular way, because we are fascinated by the way it's happening. There's equanimity. We're able to take in the experience without having a preference. Because regardless of what the experience is, it's interesting. And the state that emerges from that is one that is deeply nourishing. It's nourishing because all aspects of ourselves are engaged together. It's no longer compartmentalized. And from this engagement, because all of our resources are pooled together, meaning it's not being separated out by different distractions or pulled away by how we're relating to what's happening, by not liking it or liking it, there's just more energy, there's just more resources. And as a result, there is more awareness. And from this state, because we are not narrowing the possibilities of what we are perceiving, because there is no preference, or there is no distraction or judgment where I'm needing to defend what I'm seeing. From this state of openness, there is an incredible sense of relaxation. And the fulfillment that comes from being deeply connected to what's happening around us also comes from a sense of safety because all of our senses are engaged. So we know what's happening around us. And in knowing what's happening around us, there's less uncertainty. And when there's less uncertainty, we feel safer. And when we feel safer, we feel more relaxed and at ease. Just by being fully in sensory experience, we can also become very clear of the emotional tones, because emotions are responding to what we're sensing. Now, of course, some of this takes a little bit of finesse, right? Just as if I'm never drinking wine, I'm not going to have the level of discernment in the nuances of what I'm tasting compared to somebody that does it very often. So in the beginning, we might not have as much ability to pick up on the subtle flavors that are available in our somatic or emotional experience. But as we continue to engage over and over, we strengthen this ability. And it's also not something that's permanent, because we might strengthen it, but if we stop engaging in this way, we start to lose that acuity. So it's a fluid process. But certainly what we do by engaging, doesn't matter how frequently, is we start to discover that there's a different way of being. And this discovery serves as a reference point, because it's not like you're going to forget it. You might not remember to engage and be in it, but you'll remember that there was that one time when I felt in a certain way, or I was in a certain way, and that felt good. Not necessarily as in pleasure, but it felt good because I was alive in the fullness of my capacity. And that stays in the memory. And it serves as a reference point for us to return to. And if it's not in the conscious memory, it certainly is in the unconscious memory. The sensory is the doorway. It's a doorway to everything. Think of how other beings interact with the world around them. They interact across the interface of their body. And this is enough for them to understand the world around them. And this is enough for them to have the most appropriate response to what's happening. And if there is dysregulation where the awareness is not available for the most appropriate response, there still is learning. So that if it's a reaction, and that afterwards, when I regain consciousness, I notice the impact of the reactions, and it's not in alignment with how I wanted to show up, there's learning, which allows me to self-correct. So there's no pressure in being able to do this, because even not being able to do this is incredibly informative. We're just collecting information. Can we let go of having an opinion about it and trust that inherently there is something within us that has the ability to discern and orient if we get out of its way? So that's why we practice. We practice to expose ourselves over and over to this other possibility. And as we practice, and we don't get the reference point that we're wanting, because not always does the connection or presence happen, and we contend with our frustrations, and then our perceptions or stories that we have about our ability to do so. And then all of a sudden there's the identification with what's happening. And now I'm incompetent, or I'm never going to be good at this practice, or meditation is not for me, it's for everybody else. We can study that too. We study that and we get information about what are the tendencies of the mind. And is it grounded in reality, or is it just a mental construct that I've created? And how do I know? Well, I know because the body's going to give a response to that. It's going to give a biofeedback. And if the biofeedback is contraction, if the biofeedback is a bunch of unpleasant emotions, if the biofeedback is righteousness, then I know that something is distorted and is worth investigating. The more contracted I am around a story or an idea, the more delusion is in that story. Because the awareness is very narrow when it's defending and it's looking for evidence just to strengthen or fortify that particular point of view or story. So it's omitting all the other evidence that's around. So that's a good chance that there's distortion. And it's a wonderful indicator for this is a place I want to investigate. I'm very righteous about this. I'm very defended. I'm right, everybody is wrong. When there's a me, them, good place for investigation. When there's positionality, there's judgment, there's blame. When there's a lack of accountability or self-responsibility, when I am a victim, good place for investigation. Because it means that I'm operating at a limited capacity. I'm now operating from a place of mental activity versus the body. And the moment I am disconnected from my somatic awareness, there's a good chance I'm only receiving half the picture, if even that. So the body is the doorway. The body is the foundation. Questions or comments about what I've said?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned before how I'm trying to approach, this class or this practice in a different way than I've approached things in the past. I've always approached things very intellectually. And so I'm sitting here, we've done our meditation. I'm more in the body than I usually am. I'm kind of staying in the body. And you're saying all these things, which I could try to understand intellectually, but I'm kind of trying not to do that. I'm kind of just trying to experience them and figure that some other part of myself, some other part of my brain or whatever will get what it needs somehow. And yet it's strange because I don't fully understand what you're saying in the typical way of understanding things. And so I'm kind of letting myself be okay with that. But then there's also this question of, well, no, what if my intellect needs to be part of this process? What if understanding things better could help me get into the body better or be more sensitive to my emotions, or I don't know, there's just that it's a strange dichotomy there.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a little bit of a tension going on between the cognitive mind wanting to be a part of the process, and then another aspect that's non-cognitive that is giving the possibility that maybe it's okay for the cognitive mind to not be involved. And even though there isn't a mental comprehension of what is being said, perhaps there is something else that's receiving the information and that can retain that and assess for itself whether this is something that is valid or not valid. And the question is which one to trust. I mean, I think it comes down to that. It's a question about what is reliable. And what I really like about your report is that you're making it an experiment. And you're actually able to track both. So the awareness is there. You're able to track the doubt coming from the cognitive mind as to, is it okay for me to not be involved? Am I going to miss something important about being able to get myself out of whatever it is I'm not wanting to be in right now, because there's a possibility of something else, of there being a different way. And then there is another aspect, which is engaging, which is, well, what if we try this way? But it still hasn't gained enough evidence to support that this other way is valid. So there's doubt. And that is the right place to be, because it's what you're experiencing. And being able to observe that is what matters, not actually this, not the object of what we're observing, but how we're relating to what we're observing. And this tension will ease over time as you continue the experiment and you continue collecting evidence to answer that question. How should I be engaging with this? With the body or with the mind? And does it have to be an either or? Why can't it be both? The premise for what I'm saying is that oftentimes we're really engaging with just one thing, which is the cognitive. And we're not really engaging with the somatic or the emotional. When I say the body is the doorway, is in a way to prompt bringing that into the picture. But it's not to say that we need to eliminate fully cognition. There's a little bit of unreliability with cognition, though, because cognition is the interpretation of what's happening. And the body is actually responding directly to what's happening. So while, of course, cognition is invited, it's important to note that cognition is happening a few moments after the experience, whereas the body is actually closer. It's the one receiving the experience. And so which of the two is more objective? It's going to be the body. The interpretation of what's happening is subjective. So it might be a little bit more unreliable. But it doesn't mean that there isn't the potential for there to also be a good use of cognition. So a good use of cognition that I'm sensing right there, or I shouldn't say good, but skillful, is inquiry. That's wise mind. I'm receiving information and there's a question. Is this valid or is this not valid? It might be a noting of doubt. Right? I'm pointing out what's happening. Doubt. Resonance. Dissonance. Right? That is a mental activity. I'm noting what's happening. But I'm not going beyond that. Nor am I trying to answer the question. I am just generating the inquiry to point the attention. The mind can be used to point the attention.
I think one of the things I'm thinking about as you're talking about this is that the dichotomy is even a little starker, because what I'm processing is your words. And on some level, words are an intellectual thing. And when my intellect is not engaged, like I'm not aware on any conscious level of understanding what you're saying. And so I don't know, like if my subconscious mind is understanding it on some other level, or if I'm just not processing the words. And therefore I'm not hearing you. You know what I mean? So that's a little different than processing like sound per se. And so some of the time when you're talking, I am kind of allowing my intellect to turn off and maybe not understanding the words you're saying even.
Yeah.
So when I understand about what you're saying about the inquiry, I mean that's an interesting thing to that's an interesting experiment. Like what happens when I don't even process the words consciously? Do I process them unconsciously somehow? I don't
Yeah.
know. But I'm tired of processing things intellectually, and I'm kind of ready to lay all that down anyway. So, you know, this I think, this is the experiment I want to do. This is what I'm doing.
Great. And I think you're pointing to something really fundamental about this way of doing things, which is trial and error and tracking impact. Because I'm going to go back to we each have our own unique configurations and way of perceiving. And the way I am conveying or communicating might not actually fit with how somebody receives and understands. So it's okay to have the inquiry, and it will change with context, depending on what the conditions are, and it will also change with people. But what I'm hearing is also a fatigue or an exhaustion that has arisen from trying to process things from a cognitive way and the wanting to try something different. And to me, that fatigue or that biofeedback is a really important thing to bring the attention to. Because when we're not sure about something, when we're in doubt, the biofeedback will supply information to know the answer. So fatigue, lack of engagement. So we can flip this into an inquiry. When you are listening to me, whether you understand it or not, do you feel engaged? What's the energy level? What are the emotions? How does it impact your state? Is there a sense of connection with what's happening, even though it might not be in the modality that you're used to receiving? So these are a few guidelines that we can use when we're going into a situation and we're not sure. So I'm curious how that lands for you, David.
I guess I was just kind of paying attention to how I reacted to what you were saying rather than, again, understanding it. So I was just noticing, sometimes I'm very engaged, sometimes I'm not so engaged, sometimes other thoughts come in, sometimes something you say makes me go down some other path about something else I've been thinking about. So, I mean, that's all interesting to watch. And again, I just wonder, what part of my brain is processing what you're saying if the intellectual part isn't. But I definitely feel like, yeah, I don't want to be working my butt off trying to understand everything with my intellect anymore. I feel like that part is not serving me well anymore.
It sounds like that's more important than understanding. We don't have to understand. Wanting to understand is another arising of the mind. Wanting to understand is coming out of control. If I can understand the circumstances, then I can have a say on how things go. I have what I need to be able to make the circumstances the way I want them to be. Or it comes from the need for safety also. It comes from a lot of different reasons. But the need to understand, in particular, when there's like a need to understand, there's that kind of tightness. It's a form of control. And perhaps maybe what I'm hearing is that you're fed up of being in control of everything. And what you want is to be able to just let that go. It doesn't even matter if I understand anymore. I'm just done with having to have every aspect controlled. And that voice is coming out pretty loud. And I think that's all you need to know or understand in this moment. Not what I'm saying, but that voice.
Yeah, that was spot on.
Ben, I'm kind of curious how this all lands for you.
Well, I was going to say something similar to what Roberta had said when, when I was focusing on what I was hearing, I felt that I was a lot more in tune with the surrounding sounds than it just in my typical day. I could hear the traffic outside. I could hear people throwing out their garbage outside. I could hear my ceiling fan blades. I could hear the refrigerator in the background. So I was in tune with 4 or 5 different sounds that I normally would ignore on, just sitting here typically and working.
And what was that like to notice your capacity to tune in to those sounds?
It was calming and surprising at the same time.
Nice. I like the surprising. Yeah. We operate in a very narrow range of our total bandwidth. And there is something deadening about that. And when we realize that there's actually a wider range, and we're surprised, there's something hopeful and exciting. There's discovery. There's curiosity. Ooh, what else? What else am I skipping over and don't notice? And that's there. What can I explore? What's it really like? So I'm so happy to hear that you had that surprise. The surprise is what keeps us coming back. Any last closing comments or questions?
I'm just happy for David and happy for Ben. I really am. And that's so cool. And Aiko, you're just so cool. I know. Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much.
I wanted to thank the 3 of you I've noticed that my practice has accelerated, like my ability to see is accelerating. And it's a result of your presence and you giving me the place to have aspects of myself that are not cognitive and yet use the interface of cognition to be able to see and to express. So there is a right use of mind when it's in alignment with the other aspects. Yeah. Thank you so much for your practice and your interest, and stay curious, see what other surprises there are out there.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Aiko.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.